Breaking news came early this morning of the DPRK firing yet another ballistic missile over Japanese territory. Such a provocative move came a few days after the UN Security Council adopted tougher sanctions on the DPRK, such as limiting supply, textile exports, and migrant labor in other countries. South Korea launched surface-to-surface missiles in response. How can escalating Korean Peninsula tensions now be cooled down? To discuss the ongoing crisis, I'm happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Teng Jianqun, Director of the Center for Arms Control of the China Institute of International Studies. In the first half of our program, that's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Jianqun, with the rest of the world watching out nervously, the official statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry seems to come pretty late compared with the immediate response from the international society. I mean, there's obviously a big question mark as to whether China would precisely and comprehensively follow the UN resolutions in imposing the economic sanctions, the eighth of its kind.
I think one reason for the delay to give response to today's missile test is the confirmation by our government, and China's position in dealing with the DPRK nuclear and the missile program is very clear that China has been against such activity. For example, during the first resolution against the DPRK in 2006, 1695, that was a resolution adopted by UN Security Council, related to the missile activity. That should be the first, resolution adopted by UN Security Council. China at that time was 100% in favor of such effort by the international community. So I think China's position is clear, and China will comprehensively implement the resolutions adopted by the UN Security Council.
What do you think of one of the presidential tweets of Donald Trump calling for fury and fire over the North Korean missile and nuclear tests? At the same time, Homeland Security spokesperson of Guam, which has been put under the range of the latest ballistic missile, urged calm over the defiance and provocation from the DPRK. What do you make of the American response?
I think the Trump's administration so far has not yet got a very clear policy toward DPRK. At the very beginning, Donald Trump even said this should be a very easy job for him. Only one Hamburg and a phone call that will settle down all the dispute in the Korean Peninsula. But I think after this round of tension since early February, I think Donald Trump has learned the lessons from the complicated situation in Korean Peninsula. And to my understanding, this time the decision made by the Department of Defense, not the State Department of the United States, gave a very crucial role in the policy toward DPRK. First, Donald Trump gave such a big noise that the U.S. will give some fire against the DPRK. But now you can listen to the voice, even the Twitter from the president, that the United States would like to sit down to have dialogue with the DPRK. So this is actually a very complicated or complex policy toward DPRK by the United States. And so far, in my opinion, the Trump's administration has not yet got the clear-cut position or policy toward DPRK.
Prime Minister Shinzo Abe seems to make a big fuss about the latest ballistic missile from the DPRK. As a result, is a joke, if not a surprise, isn't it? That the price of Japanese bunkers rise immediately, and the whole population seemed to have been brought to the edge of the seat. What do you think of the Japanese reaction?
Actually, we can interpret this question from two layers. First, the public. I think the ordinary people in Japan, even today, are very worried about the missile test just flying over their heads. This is really a dangerous flight by the DPRK. And another, I think, is the politicians in Japan. For example, Shinzo Abe might manipulate the situation. The tension in Korean Peninsula might be an excuse for him to, use the self-defense force abroad and to enhance the military cooperation with the United States. Actually, in recent months, we have witnessed the cooperation. For example, the escort of U.S. task force in the sea, and also oiled the U.S. Fighting vessels in the high sea. So this is actually might be opportunity in the eyes of Shinzo Abe to enhance his position in Japan and to manipulate the situation for the expansion of Japanese self-defense force abroad.
What do you think of the worst case scenario, since both the U.S. and Japanese representatives called for an emergency session of the UN Security Council to discuss the issue of defiance and provocation from Pyongyang?
Actually, we have three choices at least on the table: dialogue, sanction, and war. And I think the sanction is only one of the choices we are having now. And at this moment, I don't think Kim Jong-un will give any compromise in his development of missile and nuclear technology, because he has been well determined to go nuclear armed.
After all, it is an issue of survival for the DPRK government and the whole country. With that, we come to the end of the first part of our program on the surprise test of yet another ballistic missile by the DPRK. We'll be back in a short while. Please do stay with us.
Recently, the Chinese currency appreciated to break the barrier against the US dollar for the first time since May 2016. Before that, the RMB had been depreciating for years. What's the reason for the sudden upturn, and where is this trend headed now? The National Financial Work Conference has confirmed the main role of the central bank in managing financial market risk. What are the biggest risks facing China's financial sector? China's foreign exchange reserves topped $3 trillion by the end of August, increasing 10.8 billion from a month earlier. In January, the number had plunged below 3 trillion. So why the sudden rise? What effect will reserves have on China's economic development? The second 1+6 roundtable dialogue held in Beijing sends a positive signal of jointly addressing challenges, developing more inclusive and mutually beneficial economic globalization, and promoting an open world economy. What role is China playing in this changing global economic outlook?
This week, the Chinese RMB weakened against the US dollar after China relaxed control on capital outflows following the dollar's dramatic dip last week. As the world's second largest economy and a holder of more than $3 trillion in reserves, China's goal of preventing financial risk and capital outflow has been emphasized repeatedly, notably in this year's government work report and at the Central Economic Work Conference, the National Financial Work Conference. So how is the performance of China's currency affecting markets at home and abroad? What risks is China's economy facing with 3 months left in the current year? And what lessons are still to be learned from the global financial crisis 10 years ago in facing anti-globalization, protectionism, and isolationism? To discuss issues of China's currency and its economy, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by He Wei-wen, Senior Research Fellow with the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renminbi University of China, and Andy Mott, Managing Director and Founder of Red Pagoda Resources. We shall also talk to Robert Kapp, Director of The Economist Corporate Network via satellite. These are our guest speakers. Welcome to our studio discussion here. Wei-wen, what do you make of the headlines on RMB?
I think, yes, everybody has been watching closely the change of the renminbi exchange rate to the dollar. Of course, we saw some consolidation of the exchange rate. Anyway, over the past months, the general trend is renminbi's rise on the dollar. Over the past 8 months and more, the renminbi appreciated more than 6% over the dollar. And but interesting enough, this is only one of the indicators, because renminbi's nominal exchange rate to the dollar is not the full picture of renminbi's strength. We should also pay attention to renminbi's index on the basket of currencies, or CFEX. The index of CFEX over the past 8 months actually virtually no change. So it's stable with the basket of currencies. So it's a dollar issue because of the fall of the dollar.
Andy, what exactly are your thoughts on the general background against which the fluctuations of RMB took place, generating more front-page stories?
Well, I think, first of all, from a shorter-term perspective, it's an indication that there's greater confidence in China's macroeconomic outlook, and I think policy situation as well. It also is a signal from the market that there is perhaps a relative lack of optimism in the United States, and I think that's driving this appreciation of the RMB. But I think more importantly, when we think about on the road to the RMB becoming a global reserve currency, that it is making more progress as we see strengthening in the financial regulation system here. I think greater confidence worldwide. One important development I think that is not widely understood is that the dollar as the denomination for how oil is bought and sold globally. And we're seeing that I think that there are some changes there with Saudi Arabia now looking at issuing these so-called panda bonds or RMB denominated debt in the United States as part of the path to accepting RMB for oil.
It's a big issue, isn't it, that RMB is increasingly used by major economies for the settlement of mega transactions, if not energy deals in the volatile region of the Middle East. Let me go to Robert Cap for his comments on Hong Kong, which is the financial free hub and also serves as the RMB offshore market. How has the offshore market reacted to the recent fall in RMB's exchange rate, Robert?
Well, I think overall the sentiment is very positive, Young Ray. What you've had in the past is a lot of guessing around PBOC moves and what would be in mind when they're trying to determine a policy rate for the RMB. And what has basically been signaled with the recent changes is that they're allowing more flexibility. That also involves allowing more of a short position on the currency, which, although there's this negative sentiment generally towards short sellers, it's actually very important for clearing and providing efficient markets. So now that that's been introduced more, yeah, you're seeing some depreciation, but this is overall good for the currency and its acceptability globally.
Robert, what do you think of the jitters psychologically and financially in mainland China after PBOC decided to tighten its grip on outflows of the capital? I mean, what do you think of the latest decision by our central bank to relax such controls?
Well, that's another move in the right direction according to global currency flows, as well as investment flows. So if you don't have to be concerned about your investment being locked up in mainland China, there are going to be a much stronger sentiment towards going ahead and taking the risk on making investments. So that's also in line with helping, whether you want to talk about China's global influence as an economy, the ability of Chinese firms to go abroad and invest, and likewise reciprocate by receiving investors, whether it's into these companies or for projects in China. It just overall is helping strengthen China's capital market.
With the recent dynamics in the exchange regime of the RMB Weiwen, what do you think of the messages that Premier Li Keqiangs has delivered through this latest round of, or annual event of 1+6 roundtable meeting with heads of major financial and international organizations such as IMF, OECD, the World Bank, so on and so forth?
I think the 6 international institutions are very powerful because they cover all the major areas of world economic governance. So the clear and close dialogue and the cooperation between China and the 6 is so important for China's active participation in the global economic governance and also for the financial stabilities, not only in the world but also in China.
Again and again, the IMF has improved its forecast about the performance of the Chinese economy, upgrading the expectations of observers. What do you think of the note of optimism from IMF?
I think it's well justified. I mean, we look at the forecast of 6.5%, first half GDP was 6.9%. with the 19th Party Congress coming up, of course, with important political events, there is a priority placed on stable economic growth. One point I'd like to make about this, too, with the 1+6 roundtable discussion that just concluded is that I think it's also an important milestone that shows that the RMB is becoming an increasingly viable alternative as a reserve currency, that we're seeing the end of the dollar hegemony, which is not just good, I think, for China, but for the global financial system overall, in that allows other countries, whether that's Saudi Arabia, other countries, then to diversify their reliance on one single currency.
A second look at the Chinese economy, what do you think of the driving force behind the dynamics and resilience of the Chinese economy?
Yes, if we still come back to the three driving forces, the consumption, of course, has been performing very well. It's even gaining momentum. And the investment is actually growing slower. Anyway, the industrial production performs very well. And also the third driving force is net export. It has been performing very well this year. It might contribute positively to GDP growth by 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points, which will make a big difference in GDP growth.
A question for both Andy and Robert. Why did Premier Li Keqiangs use the expression of a synchronized coordination and emphasis between and among the three major driving forces, consumption, investment, and exports, import-exports, of course, for the Chinese economic growth, instead of using a clear emphasis only on the domestic spending, which is an important part of what we call the new normal or supply-side reform?
Well, maybe I can go first. I think whenever we're talking about monetary policy or macroeconomic policy, it really all is a balancing act. So when we look at, say, the RMB strengthening too much, that's good if you're a consumer buying imported products or you're looking to invest overseas, but it's bad if you're an exporter. So every country, but I think in China in particular, is focused on managing its currency. And similarly, with macroeconomic drivers, growth drivers, that over-reliance on one driver just leads to greater structural imbalances. And it's like eating a balanced diet, right? You want to have your proteins, your carbohydrates, and your fats in the right proportions.
Robert, obviously Premier Li Keqiangs was referring to the balance sheet of the Chinese economy with a clear emphasis on synchronized and balanced development of the three major forces, as mentioned by Wei Wen here in the Beijing studio, instead of talking about domestic spending only. What do you think of the implications here, the policy implications?
Well, one of the tricky things about fiscal policy around the world is countries tend to adopt different objectives, like central bank policies. They might have different goals according to whatever the political requirements are. You also have China, for example, standing outside a lot of other major countries that have very low interest rates, with having relatively high, and in today's environment that means anything above zero, like compared to Japan or what we see in the Eurozone as being relatively high. So what's really important, though, is to coordinate at this point about synchronicity on the effects, that one country doesn't unilaterally think, well, in order to shore up my balance sheet, I'm going to start either priming the pump with a very loose monetary policy, or I'm going to be adopting some sort of different strategy compared to others. That the policies can differ, and that's going to happen, but that the effects, you have to look at the effects on the overall global economic system. So if there's some sort of sense of coordination, I think dialogues like the one that recently took place are positive for that. But you need to follow that up with action. And again, it's the action not on policies per se, but the effects they produce.
Our forex reserve fell behind. The forex reserve fell below 3 trillion in January this year, but now we are coming to terms with a robust rebound back to 3 trillion again. What does that mean for our economy?
I think there are different reasons. First, at the beginning of this year, there was a sentiment that dollar looked strong ahead. So people tend to change their money into dollar assets, and which has depleted some part of the foreign exchange reserve. The second reason is now that the environment has changed. Renminbi has been gaining momentum vis-a-vis the dollar. And the second factor is the fundamentals for China's economy is improving. So people has gained the confidence in the Chinese economy. And the third factor lies in the technical reason, because all our foreign exchange reserves are in different currencies, not only in dollars, but we also have euros, yen, and sterling pounds. And so, but the total amount was calculated in dollars only. So when dollar depreciates vis-a-vis the euro, vis-a-vis the yen or the pound, then our total currency reserve in the nomination of dollar also grows.
Well, I do want to talk about the unemployment all the other way around. However, what do you think of the three hallmark success in the Chinese economy: the high-speed railway, online shopping, as well as mobile payment? These three things are described as the pillars in supporting the Chinese growth. What do you think of the importance here?
Well, I think they all certainly contribute to economic growth, mainly through efficiency. So when you make it easier and cheaper for people to travel from one point to another, whether for leisure or for business, that
particularly considering the massive delay of the flights,
yes.
particularly in Eastern China. Everybody was complaining about why on and off the delays occurred, and it's a big trouble indeed.
Yes, yes. And I think so that's why we see why high-speed rail has been successful in China, particularly along the routes of, say, between Beijing and Shanghai. Mm-hmm. So that's a contributor to economic growth. Mobile payments as well, I think, accelerates the pace of commerce. So when you remove friction, generally speaking, there's more transactions, people are more, it makes it easier to buy. So I think these are all, both of these are growth drivers, as we say, the pillars of the economy.
While India is so proud of being the biggest catch-up economy to surpass China in terms of economic size and total, Robert, the Chinese, however, are talking about the advent of an AI era, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, as well as big data. Now, what do you think should be the major driving force to sustain our economic growth?
Well, definitely along the lines of what you refer to there, Yang Rui, more advanced technologies, and when you think of AI, it even gets beyond the sense of a technology per se. It's algorithms. It's a very advanced form of software. It's not even the way we thought of software. It's a whole process of elevating the capabilities of the things that drive the world. I mean, you can use AI in any product and indeed in any service. So definitely, to the point of the comparison with India, India is now catching up. India is where China was maybe a decade or more ago. It also has some advanced sectors, but not nearly as far advanced as China is. China is trying to get out of a middle income status and into a high income status. And not only that, having an economy that's really cutting edge industries. And one of its traditional issues has been in recent years with overcapacity. You mentioned supply side reform, that's another big issue. AI and this move to technologically cutting edge industries is really a way for China to leapfrog forward, and it's making impressive progress in that way.
Well, Alibaba is, of course, a barometer indicating the dynamics of the Chinese economy. But what do you think of, say, Wei Wen and Andy, what do you think of the spirit of innovation, such as, for example, the robots, bitcoins? I mean, generally we see increasingly artificial intelligence, big data, green technology, green finance, for example. These innovations improve the society and economic pattern while potential risks remain. So what do you think of the contradictory and conflicting signals?
I think we encourage innovation because innovation is the permanent driving force for the economic growth. I think we should focus on innovation on the following areas, key areas. First, the innovation of key technologies, core technology, new materials. Second, the innovation of new business models. Third, the innovation of new chains of production chains, including Internet of Things. Of course, among all these innovations, the artificial intelligence will play a big role, and the big data, digital economy will usher in a new economy. And however, as far as Bitcoin is concerned, I don't think Bitcoin coin has anything to do with innovation, because money itself is nothing. It's only a symbol representing the value of the real product or real service, but Bitcoin represents nothing. And it's, some people, even very high-level people, say that it's a fraud, it's nothing. We have to study on it. Innovation cannot be connected with Bitcoin.
I'd have two things to maybe add to that. I think first, when we think of these technologies like AI and robotics, in the 1+6 roundtable, I believe Premier Li Keqiangs referred to this as the NPR, the next production revolution. And of course, it can bring a lot of benefits, but it also can be very disruptive for society, because it will not only put blue-collar workers out of work, but even now white-collar workers out of work. But I think this plays to China's strength, because it will require a coordinated, coherent, and very thorough policy response, not just domestically, but globally. And I think this is where China is playing a leadership role in the development of these technologies, especially in robotics, but also leading and coordinating a policy response that will hopefully ease the transition to a new economy, a new society where there will be much fewer people that need to work to provide the services and products we have.
While there has been a very interesting debate, though, country over about how to set standards for green financing in this country, President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiangs are clearly aware of the danger of not returning back to real economy. What do you think of our emphasis on the real economy?
Real economy, of course, is encouraged, but we should have a clean economy, not to repeat the old track of the low-end development with pollutions. So I think green development with green financing, of course, will be the core in our target.
Thank you so much. With that, we come to the end of this dialogue on the resilience of our RMB as well as the Chinese economy in general. I will see you next time. Goodbye.